Throughout 2006 and 2007, an online poker player who played under the screen name Andy McLEOD was making huge score after huge score. Unlike most highly successful online tournament players, Andy McLEOD, who also plays on Full Tilt under the screen name The Fat Fish, kept his identity very secret. Although many in the poker industry already knew the reason for his secrecy, the situation came to a head in late 2007 when a fellow poker player outed him in the online poker forums as being under 18 years old. With that, Andy McLEOD, The Fat Fish, and all of the players' other screen names disappeared from the virtual felts. Disappeared, that is, until a few weeks ago, when Andy McLEOD, whose real name is James Obst, stepped back into the ring to start making huge scores once again. The now 18-year-old Obst made the final table of the PokerStars Sunday Million a week and a half ago to come back in style. Well, the floodgates are now open for Obst, and the legal concerns are out the window. So we've got him on the phone right now from Australia to talk about having to leave the game, how it feels to come back, and how he continues to make ridiculously consistent scores. All right, so thank you very much for doing this interview with us, Andy. James, actually. I'm actually going to be probably screwing that up a few times in this interview. So thank you very much for doing this interview with us. I appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
So before we get too far into the strategy, actually, we really do need to talk about kind of you getting pushed offline in the first place and your triumphant return and all that good stuff. So could you maybe explain to those who don't know what happened to you after in late 2007 that got you pushed offline?
Yeah, well, I had a bit of a dispute with a colleague, and I probably said some things about him which I didn't really need to, and he was obviously quite offended, and he decided to tell everyone that I was underage. So then, everything just sort of took off, and people emailed the sites, and that was that for.
And so, you were actually, in fact, banned from the sites then, is that correct?
Yeah, at least the major ones.
Okay. And were there any repercussions, or did they just make it so that you couldn't play anymore?
No, I think it was just they suspended my accounts, but I think it's all fine now that I'm 18.
I was going to say, obviously they're welcoming you back now that you're of legal age, but I just wanted to check and make sure they didn't seize any funds or anything like that, so everything's okay.
Oh, no, I don't think so.
Okay, you don't think so? You don't know for sure, though?
No, they didn't.
Well, as far as the kind of dispute you had with this colleague, who we'll leave unnamed based on the fact that obviously you don't necessarily want to name the person, have you mended those bridges at all, or are you still kind of feeling a little hurt about that?
Oh, that's the nature of the business. You'll have some characters you don't get along with and whose values you don't sort of agree with, but I can't see myself being great friends with him in the future, but I'd certainly be pleasant around him, or I wouldn't sort of try to pick a fight with him if I saw him or anything like that.
Okay. Well, what have you been doing in the meantime? You've had basically 8 months to not play online poker, so...
Yeah, initially I just spent a lot of time trying to get an apartment here in Adelaide, and because that's what I'd been planning on doing for quite a long time, and then I've actually spent most of the year in hospital because I had to have surgery and other fun stuff.
Other fun stuff. Sounds fun. Actually, you said that. We're doing this interview at 9 a.m. your time right now, and you're saying that later on today you have to go in for surgery. How long is that going to put you out of commission for?
Not quite sure, actually. Just shouldn't be too long, but that's the last one, so hopefully it'll be better after that.
Okay. That's good news. Well, what is your take on the entire... obviously you're going to have a biased viewpoint on underage gambling because you were underage and you gambled and it worked out quite well for you. But and you always hear about people like superstars like you and Annette 15 who have done really well for themselves while they're underage, and people kind of glorify the fact that they were so good at their game at such a young age. But then you obviously have people that say people that are underage shouldn't be playing. We have rules against it for a reason. What's your take?
Yeah, well, I don't really think they should be playing. Obviously, it's against the rules, and besides the fact that most people won't really be mature enough to handle the money, I mean, there's other more important things to be doing at that age, like school and whatnot. So, I mean, I certainly don't think people should be playing underage. It's just quite difficult when you get introduced to the game at such a young age and you have a real passion for it immediately. So, especially when you know other people who are playing underage and there's sort of no issue there, and well, as in they're getting away with it fine, and I mean, you're not getting an unfair advantage over anyone else. So, from that perspective, I mean, it's almost just like drinking underage or anything like that. You sort of don't think twice.
Okay. Well, and since you got so good at such a young age, do you have any idea how you got so good? I mean, what were you doing that was making you improve your game?
Sleepless nights. Just playing too much, probably.
Not paying attention to school.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of school, I mean, did you finish your pre-university school, and are you going to go to university?
I actually did everything, but I got sick just on Year 12 exams, so didn't quite finish those. So
okay.
Glad it's over, and maybe one day I'll go back and finish.
Well, now let's talk about it. I mean, you're of age now. You're 18. You've already had a huge score to kind of break back into the swing of things. You made the final table at the Sunday Million. So, I mean, how does it feel to be back into it? Is anything changed?
Yeah, it's good to be back. I wouldn't really say anything's changed besides a few relationships, but no, I don't think everyone still plays pretty similar, and everything's going along as it had been, so it's good.
And you don't think taking that time away from poker has affected you negatively at all or anything like that?
Oh, I mean, you probably lose a few reads on the people you're playing with, but I wouldn't say too much.
Okay. Well, now let's get into a little bit of strategy, if you don't mind. So, I mean, for all of these questions that I'm about to ask you, let's kind of take as granted that many hands are going to really be player and situation dependent. So, what is the best advice that you can give for playing in the early level of tournaments?
Yeah, I think the general consensus is to play pretty tight, and I certainly agree with that. I don't play very loose in the early levels. I would say that quite a few players that I play with, they play a bit too straightforward, and it's very easy. Like, I mean, I know a lot of people who will only ever sort of re-raise with kings or aces, and while that's a fine strategy, I mean, you don't get knocked out much. At the same time, you're not really taking advantage of situations and being unpredictable, which can help your chances of accumulating chips. So, but I would certainly say just be quite tight before the antes come in.
Okay, and I mean, you're saying that the general consensus is to be tight, but considering that's the general consensus, does that mean that more often than not you should? I mean, usually it's the case that if everyone's saying you should do something, then you should do the opposite because no one's doing that. Is that not the case here?
It's certainly possible. I mean, there's just sort of less reward because obviously the pots are so small that if you try to take advantage of that, you can often just find yourself in trouble. But I think you certainly can, to a certain extent, exploit that.
And I guess I suppose that even if it's the general consensus, there may be enough weak players out there that are trying to be trickier and being loose enough that you can pick them off and hold your own well enough.
For sure.
So, what is the biggest misconception then maybe that people are having about optimal strategy in early stages? Like, what are the biggest mistakes that people are making?
Do you mean the regulars or the fish?
Well, both, actually. I mean, if you think that the regulars, the people that think they know what they're doing, are making mistakes, then what kind of mistakes do you think that they're making?
Yeah, I suppose I wouldn't say so much mistakes, but they're just sort of, they're very straightforward, and it's very easy to know sort of when they're going to have a hand, what range they're going to have, because nothing sort of changes ever, and I mean, most most of the regulars seem to just play the early stages pretty much on autopilot. So, whereas, I mean, obviously the fish are limping a lot and doing a lot of the dumb stuff that we're all familiar with. But yeah, I would say that the regulars probably are a bit too predictable in the early levels.
Okay. And as far as the regulars being predictable, I mean, to maybe give kind of a behind the scenes on that, is that likely just because they're playing so many tables at once that they aren't really they are playing on autopilot, like you said, because they aren't deep in any of these tournaments, so they aren't giving as much focus to them?
Yeah, certainly possible. Yeah, I would agree with that, but at the same time, you don't see them play too much differently if they're just playing one table. But
okay.
I mean, definitely if you're playing a lot of tables, there's sort of not really room to be totally creative.
Okay. And as far as the weak players, the non-regulars, let's call them, you say they're limping into a lot of pots. How exactly is that getting them in trouble? In what ways?
Yeah, I mean, the regulars will just sort of raise them in position, and they'll sort of just be leaking a lot of chips because obviously you don't hit the flop half the time, so you only hit a third of the time, obviously, so just sort of leaking chips where they just limp and call before the flop and check and fold when they don't hit, so, and then they tend to, because they're limping in with weak hands, they tend to overvalue their hands post-flop. If they flop top pair or something with a weak kicker, they sort of can't get rid of it, and just making mistakes that way.
Okay. So then, in your opinion, what is the best strategy to combat those kinds of people?
Yeah, I mean, generally you just play position against them and build the pot before the flop so you can take the chips uncontested when they miss the flop, and which is going to be most of the time, so that'll be profitable in itself, besides when they make mistakes when they have hands.
Okay. So basically continuation bets and getting them to check fold.
Yep.
And also, obviously, flopping monsters against them and trying to get them to overvalue their cards, like you were saying.
That helps too.
And now, you always hear about kind of being aggressive on the bubbles and pretty much throughout the later stages of the tournaments. Can you add anything to that advice? Because it's kind of general, like saying just be aggressive in these stages. What can you add to that advice to maybe focus the meaning?
Yeah, well, I mean, my advice would be don't overestimate it. I mean, I just watched the 100 rebate yesterday, and I mean, most of the guys there are sort of regulars, and the bubble's not such a big deal, and you get a hand where someone's open raising, and a big stack re-raises them, and then the chip leader comes over the top, 4 bets from behind with queen deuce offsuit, and gets snap called and loses most of his chips on the bubble. So you see a lot of really stupid things happen on the bubble, and I think it's really overestimated, but there are definitely times to be aggressive, but I would suggest that it's more, it's going to be a better strategy to do it in like some really big tournaments, like, I mean, probably the World Championship Online Poker main event or something like that, where there's a lot of satellite players who the money is really significant to. That's where you're going to get the really scared players, and I try to take advantage of it then by obviously opening the pots and playing back at the big stacks who you suspect are trying to abuse the bubble as you want to as well. So I'd just be careful of doing it in tournaments where the money's perhaps not as significant to the players as you might think.
Gotcha. Perfect. All right. Well, that's all the questions I've got for you. I really appreciate you getting on the phone with us all the way from Australia to do this interview. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Shawn.
And thank you guys for watching The Online Zone on Card Player TV.